Season 2 of Halo Infinite is almost at its end, so in today's video I wanted to provide a little bit of a retrospective on the events of this 6-month period, give my thoughts on the season as a whole, and also talk about some elements that I would improve if 343 were to do something similar in future. I'll mostly just be talking about the things that happened in the game and not so much things to do with delays or the changes in management, but I will mention them where I believe they are necessary for the context of the video. Anyway, without wasting any more of your time, let's jump straight in.
What the? Contact!
They aren't hostiles. They're wolves. Back from the hunt.
Season 2 started with quite a bit of a bang with its narrative cutscene, which was pretty entertaining. We got to see our multiplayer Spartan as well as the commander, and we were also introduced to 3 new characters: Spartan Eklund, Spartan Din, and the banished AI Aratus. We were finally getting some level of a story for the multiplayer, which was pretty exciting, and I was looking forward to these new characters getting fleshed out a little bit more. There was clearly some issues from a narrative perspective. The fact that this banished AI has been brought to the academy, which is supposed to be this super secret place, and Commander Lorette also seemed completely unfazed by this and pretty much smiled the entire cutscene, which was a bit weird. But it was nice to have some level of a narrative to the multiplayer. The real question was, would this go anywhere? Spoiler alert, it obviously didn't, but we'll talk a bit more about that later on. Both Din and Eklund were pretty much introduced to advertise the new armor core, the Rakshasa core, which was available in the Season 2 Battle Pass. This core was free, and there was even a few other free items for it that you could unlock over the Battle Pass, but most of the good ones were of course paid. The new Battle Pass had 100 tiers of brand new items, and some of these were pretty cool. There was a lot of cosmetics available for the Mark 7, which was nice to see, a few new free items, and a lot of really good paid ones. You could even earn up to 1,000 credits, which is the amount that a Battle Pass costs, so realistically, you could buy this Battle Pass and then maybe use the credits to buy the Season 1 Battle Pass, or save them for any future Battle Pass. There's still clear improvements that need to be made to the Battle Pass system to make it a little bit better, but as a whole, this was an improvement. The new banished AI could be unlocked at tier 50, and he's probably my favourite AI to use in the multiplayer. His dialogue is pretty hilarious. The main items that everyone seemed to be interested in were the big skull shoulders that you could get for the Rakshasa core, and it seems like people were pretty happy with all of the new armor for the Mark 7 too. Some of the cosmetics that were supposed to release with the Firefall helmet ended up being in this Battle Pass, and it seemed like people were pretty happy about that. I liked most of the items that were available, it's just the challenge system is a painful grind, but we know that there's going to be improvements made on that with the winter update, and we're also getting match-based XP, which is awesome. Moving away from the Battle Pass for now, the season added 2 brand new maps, Breaker and Catalyst. Most of you probably already know how I feel about Breaker. It's my least favourite map in the game. I think it's the worst big team battle map. Visually it looks amazing, and I'm really glad we got a proper banished map, not one that's just set in like a grassy field with a few little banished structures, one that felt like a true banished map. That was great. Unfortunately, the map isn't very good. Catalyst, however, I think is a pretty solid arena map, and although I don't play loads of arena, Catalyst is one that is almost always fun to play on. Capture the Flag on here can be super intense, and I absolutely love it. It was a shame that we only got 2 maps over this 6-month period, but at least it was 2 new maps. I think everyone was disappointed that there was only 2, and we knew again that the season was going to be 6 months, but with Forge just around the corner as of now, there will be no shortage at that point. The other main selling point of the season was the new modes. We had Last Spartan Standing and King of the Hill, which both released day 1. King of the Hill wasn't really a new mode, but it was the return of King of the Hill, which is great. As for Last Spartan Standing, well, that's a bit of an interesting one. It felt like it was almost this sort of test battle royale, but personally I'm really not a fan. We had 2 events that centered around this mode, Interference and Alpha Pack, and I will talk about them in a bit more detail later on, but it really sucked that one of the main brand new modes couldn't be played with friends. It was a free-for-all mode, so on matchmaking you had to play it on your own. In custom games, sure, you could play it with others, but this was really disappointing. And when it first released, it was only playable on Breaker. This was supposed to tie to the narrative event, but it never really felt like it. In the opening cutscene, they mention this area which is on the planet the Breaker is set on, and you can see that area that they show in the hologram in the background, but it never really felt like it was tied to the narrative. It's definitely a missed opportunity to have not done some sort of PvE event. They could have just had like a mission where you had to fight the banished off on Breaker. Didn't have to be a very long thing, but that would have been something fun to see in that season. There was also a third brand new mode that was added pretty early into the season 2, this being Land Grab. This means 2 of the 3 completely brand new modes was another zone one, which felt a bit unnecessary, but oh well. This was tied to the Entrenched Fracture event, and again I'll speak about that in more detail when we get to the events section. We also had a few new playlists which did add new modes. They weren't technically completely brand new ones, a lot of them were basically custom game variants, but it was new things to play in the game. We had Social Big Team Battle, which came with the Yappening. This had various Fiesta modes. It also had Shotty Snipers, and Skockets, which is where every player has a skewer, a rocket launcher, and a repulsor. This one was a bit more unique. My personal favourite in the playlist is probably Fiesta Capture the Flag. I'm really not much of a Fiesta person, but on Big Team Battle it is much more enjoyable, and Capture the Flag is just pure chaos on Fiesta, which is probably why I enjoy it a bit more. We also got the addition of a Team Snipers playlist. This was received somewhat poorly because there was like 3 different modes and only one of them had the actual sniper rifle. There was one with a skewer and mangler, and I think there was another one with a stalker rifle and pulse carbine. I didn't play Team Snipers like at all, so it's not really something I can comment on, but it seemed like people really weren't happy with the choices that 343 made with this playlist. I believe people just wanted to play snipers or shotty snipers and then would instead start a match and get killed by the mangler, which definitely came as a shock. On a much higher note though, we finally got the highly requested Team Doubles playlist. Again, this is one that I haven't really played myself, but that's just because I'm not much of a super competitive player and didn't really ever feel like I needed to play Team Doubles. But people were pretty happy about its inclusion, so that can only be a good thing. And then the most recent additions were Social Slayer, which is like Social Big Team Battle but for Arena. The modes are a bit different. We have Kong Slayer, Purple Rain, Rocket Dodgeball. I think there's also another rocket launcher mode, and also Ninja Slayer, which is the one where everyone has energy swords and grappling hooks. As a whole, this playlist is pretty fun. It definitely feels much more social. Out of all the modes here, Purple Rain is my favourite one to play. Especially on Breaker, I think it is very well suited for that map, and it's nice to have some more social playlists in the game. I almost completely forgot to mention that we also had Rumble Pit. I think Rumble Pit was added during Season 2, I honestly can't remember because again, it's not something I've played loads of. This has stuff like Vampire Ball, it also has Ninja Slayer Free-For-All, but again, this was a problem because this was a free-for-all playlist. Which means again, all of these fun game modes you couldn't play with your friends, not until the Social Slayer playlist came out a couple of weeks ago. And then we also got the inclusion of Ranked Free-For-All, which was another highly requested playlist, and players seemed pretty happy that this was in here too. So we did have a fair share of new game modes across this season. It's just a shame they were spread out really horribly. We would just have periods where there would be completely nothing added, then all of a sudden we got Social Slayer and Ranked Free-For-All, or nothing would happen and then we got Ranked Doubles. Honestly, the only problem with the inclusion of these playlists is it shows how terrible the playlist system can be on this game. Some playlists, it would just take you absolutely forever to find a match because of the way that it's designed, which is unfortunate. But at least there was now more variety. Moving over to the events, the first one that started with the season was Interference. This was the very first narrative event that the game had and tied directly to that opening cutscene. Essentially, the plot is that the player has to play Last Spartan Standing, and we're trying to remove Aratus from Din's head, which we succeed in doing. Again, it didn't really feel like there was much of a narrative. At the beginning of the event, you have a cutscene where Commander Lorette just talks to you and is basically like, hey, go and play Last Spartan Standing. And then at the end of the event, once you've completed it, she's basically just like, well done, you did it, Spartan, congratulations. You don't see your Spartan in these cutscenes, it's literally like a glorified audio log. You just see the character stand there and talk to you. It felt really pointless. This was a 2-week event that completely centered around Last Spartan Standing, and by day 1 I was already sick of this mode. The cosmetics were cool, we got a brand new helmet, there was some chess pieces, they were all pretty much stuff for the Rakshasa core, and obviously they were all free, so people that were playing for free at least had some level of variety in their cosmetic options for this new armor core. I think this event was fine. I don't like Last Spartan Standing, and for the first 2 weeks it was only playable on Breaker. I think by the second week they should have already brought the other maps into rotation, because that would have just made the second week of the event feel a little bit more enjoyable. There was also a bunch of problems at the beginning of the season, like people's challenges weren't getting completed. So 343, to compensate for this, changed it in the second week, where every time you complete one challenge, you tier up twice in this event. And that was a good thing for them to do, but at that point I'd already completed it, so it didn't really benefit me much at all. It seemed like the problem stemmed from, like, if you run out of lives in Last Spartan Standing, you can just leave the lobby, but if you left the lobby, it wouldn't instantly come up with your challenge being complete, not until like a match or two later, which was really annoying. This would then mean if you jumped into another match, your challenges wouldn't have reset yet. But for what it was, for an introduction event to the season, interference wasn't terrible. The second event we had was the introduction of the new Fracture event, Entrenched. This came with the Eagle Strike Armor Core. Similarly to the Tenrai event, all players had access to a free 30 tier battle pass, or rather an event pass, and to tier up on it you'd have to complete challenges in the brand new mode Land Grab. As mentioned earlier, this is a zone based mode. Each zone you capture awards your team a point. All 3 zones need to be captured before the zones reset. I'm also not really a huge fan of this one. I think this is a mode that would probably work a little bit better in Big Team Battle. And honestly, when this was added, Big Team Battle really needed some new stuff, as it still only had the exact same amount of modes. Last Spartan Standing is played on Big Team Battle maps, but that's a free-for-all mode, that is not a Big Team Battle mode. But yeah, Land Grab was basically just people spamming grenades the second you stepped into a zone. It was chaotic, but it wasn't fun chaotic. And just like Tenrai, people got sick of this one very quickly. Not in the sense that they disliked the mode, most people seemed to enjoy it, but people got sick of the same event just being repeated over and over again. There was no variation when Land Grab returned, they didn't do anything else with it. I mean, I don't know exactly what they could do, maybe like Land Grab Fiesta, but I feel like that'd be even worse. But 343 didn't do anything to change the event up whenever it returned. When the event did come back the second time, they tried to implement some form of narrative that was on Halo Waypoint. I think it might have been viewable in-game if you check the news tab, but this was just like a short story written on Waypoint that would be updated every week, and players could choose where the adventure goes. They'd be given 2 choices that they could vote for, and they would essentially determine where the story would go. This was a good idea, but I don't think the execution was the best. There was no real way to actually experience it properly in-game. It would have been cool if they did some sort of webcomic that you could actually view in the menu, or obviously they can post it on Waypoint and whatever and give players a variety of ways to look at it, but it just wasn't that compelling. I'm very much glad they tried to implement some sort of story with the Fracture event. It seems like a very good idea to flesh out these Fracture timelines, and it can make the armor and the cosmetics a bit more appealing with it. But its implementation really wasn't the best, but I am hoping that they build on this a bit better in future. The Eagle Strike Core is pretty cool. I don't like it as much as the Yoroi one. The Yoroi one is one of my favourite cores in the game, and I think the Yoroi armor is amazing. But Eagle Strike was pretty solid too. It goes for this steampunk World War II sort of aesthetic, and that is evident when you look at the different types of armor being based off of different military helmets. The free pass was okay. I do think Tenrai's was a little bit better, just because you could unlock 3 different helmets, whereas this one you could only get 2. I also think the way that everything was spread out here was pretty terrible. I mean, Tenrai wasn't exactly leagues ahead, considering that the first 7 tiers were like challenge swaps, emblems, etc. But once they did update it and improved that pass, I think it was a lot better. Eagle Strike definitely didn't have as much fluff, but the cosmetics as a whole just didn't seem as compelling. There was 6 helmets for this core compared to the 4 that Tenrai had, but again, 4 of these were shop items and only 2 of them were free. There was also 3 coatings. Realistically, I would have spread them out so you get a coating every 10 tiers, but instead you had like 2 of them within the between like tier 11 to 20, and then 1 of them within like the last 10 tiers. So this meant that unless you spent money during the first week of Entrenched, everyone was basically running around with the same coating. This isn't a bad thing, but it really hurts variety, and also prevented a lot of people from using the core until they'd either brought or unlocked some of these cosmetics, and you'd have to wait a month in between each time. The next event we had was the second narrative event, Alpha Pack. This again centered around Last Spartan Standing. Its narrative was nothing. It was literally nothing. We had a cutscene of Eklund firing in the training range, and she basically just tells you to go and play Last Spartan Standing. You do that, complete your event, and she's like, well done playing Last Spartan Standing, but sometimes you've got to work with a team. And it's like, okay. But this did add the Morrigan helmet, which looks awesome and is my favourite helmet on that core. I'd like it a little bit more if it wasn't for the fact that for some reason it's got an extremely long neck, but whatever. Again, this provided players with 10 free cosmetics, and 343 actually carried over the whole complete 1 challenge, unlock 2 tiers thing. I think they realised most people didn't really want to play Last Spartan Standing at this point, as it was also the least played playlist in the game. There was a cool coating you could unlock, there was a visor, there was some other goodies that players could acquire. It's just a shame that, again, this all centred on Last Spartan Standing. Now you could play it on all 4 big team battle maps, not just Breaker, which was great, except it was very clear that none of the other maps really worked for it that well. It's okay on high power, but Fragmentation and Deadlock just feel terrible to play on this mode. When Forge comes out, I'm hoping some players design maps that are perfectly suited for Last Spartan Standing, and maybe then it'll be a little bit more enjoyable. At this point with the multiplayer narrative, people were really disappointed as it just didn't lead anywhere. We had 2 narrative events that just didn't do anything. Over the course of the season, 343 tried to flesh out Eklund a little bit more, but similarly to the Entrenched storyline, this was all done as like a waypoint blog or just something you'd read in the news tab. I think it would have been much better if every time they added one of these new sort of blogs that were supposed to be like conversations between characters about Eklund or a conversation that Eklund was having, give us some sort of special challenge during that week and allow us to unlock this as an audio log which we can view in the armor hall. This way people that care about the story could earn it in game and then be able to experience it in a more audible way. It'd be cool to eventually expand this library of audio logs that could tell you things about these different characters. It seemed like both this and the Entrenched story was something that were a little bit rushed. They wanted to try and make them a bit more compelling, but again, they just didn't do a very good job at it. I do think in future they need to have it as like an audio log or some sort of webcomic kind of thing, so players have a more visual or audible way of experiencing these things. The vast majority of casual fans probably don't even know that these things exist because the presentation of them was practically non-existent. I really hope that Season 3 onward the narrative is fleshed out a lot more, because as of right now the multiplayer narrative just isn't interesting. It had a good start with that narrative cutscene right at the start of the season, but it hasn't gone anywhere. Since we know we're not getting any proper campaign content for a while, this needs to be better. Anyway, the final new event we had of the season was Yappening, which was by far the best one. This is the one that introduced the social big team battle playlist. It was first known as the Yappening playlist. The cosmetics here weren't the best, but the mode was fun and could be experienced with your friends. Something that both Interference and Alpha Pack were lacking. Entrenched you could obviously play with 3 other players, but Yappening you could basically bring everyone along. It was great. The main issue was that none of the cosmetics really felt like they were linked to Yap Yap, the thing that the event was named after. 343 did make a little comic to announce the event, which was kind of nice. But again, this was basically just on Waypoint or on social media platforms and couldn't really be experienced in-game. I think it would have been great if when you booted it up after the Yappening event had started, it plays this cutscene which is just the webcomic, but maybe they had some people to voice the characters. That would have been sweet. It would have been a good way of telling people that have just started the game up that there's a new event on. They tried to explain a lot of the cosmetics as things that Yap Yap just had lying over, and we were introduced to the new Grunt Flip Flop, who is now a fan favourite. But yeah, as a whole, Yappening was a very good event and I'd love more stuff like this. The only problem was that it just didn't feel like it was linked to Yap Yap. One thing worth mentioning that was quite funny that happened over this season was the removal of both Land Grab and Last Spartan Standing. Both of the completely brand new game modes were taken out of the game other than when the events were on, halfway through the season, maybe a little bit later. Last Spartan Standing, it's because its player count was just that low, it made up for 0.2% of the player base or something like that. And Land Grab as well didn't exactly have loads of people on it, other than when Entrenched was available. And now Land Grab only returns when Entrenched was on. Well, this week was the last week at the time I'm recording this. It ends today. So Land Grab is now only playable in custom games. I think it would be a great idea if 343 just added it to quick play and just had it as another mode in there. But yeah, both of the big 2 game modes that were added this season were removed. There was a few other things that were supposed to happen during Season 2 that kind of didn't, such as co-op being delayed. It was supposed to release August, but then got pushed back to November 8th with the winter update, and the same applies to Forge. Speaking of co-op though, we did have a co-op flight at some point during this season, and that was really fun. I streamed that with fellow content creator Relax, and we had a great time, and it got everyone super excited for co-op. There was issues, but it didn't seem like anything major, and it seemed like they were going to reach that August deadline, until they didn't. We were also told before the season that they were going to aim to get drop pods out monthly. I think over the 6-month period we probably had 2 drop pods. One of them added cross-core visors and allowed some of the Mark 7 helmets to make use of a few other attachments. This was the bigger one of the 2 drop pods. Obviously, they came with like new playlists and stuff like that, but as a whole, these updates kind of didn't do much. And yeah, mentioning cross-core, that is something they spoke about that they were hoping to try to fully implement or get most of it done during Season 2, and we only ended up with cross-core visors. So it seemed like there was a lot of broken promises. I think Season 2 as a whole was fine. It wasn't great. I mean, for a 6-month period, it's clear there wasn't enough content. That was also evident from like looking at the shop. We started with getting new items every week, then we stopped getting dailies within like the first 2 days or something like that. Well, first like 2 weeks. And then eventually it reached a point where we were only getting 2 new items a week, and last week we didn't really get anything new. I'm hoping because the season was so long though, it means that 343 can get everything ready for Season 3 and for future seasons without much of an issue, and they will be shorter and be much more enjoyable. The content that came with Season 2 was pretty underwhelming as a whole, and all of the big stuff that was supposed to be coming ended up getting delayed. But I'm very excited for the winter update. This is going to feel like a completely new season because it's adding a lot of great new content. We're getting Forge, we're getting co-op, and we're getting a variety of other things. But anyway, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Did you enjoy Season 2? Are you disappointed by it? I'm curious to hear what everyone has to say. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.